I am Lisa Morse. Is this kind of the camera zone? Okay. I'm Lisa. Welcome. We're so glad to see everybody here tonight. And this is an event put on by the Shoreline High Cap Advocacy Committee. And we're here, our mission, I'm the co-chair of that, and Annie Colton is the other co-chair. But the mission of the group that I will read, our group's objectives are to build community among high cap families and to increase awareness of the academic, social, and emotional needs of high cap students. Oh,
I'm just going to hold this.
Yeah. We're also recording this on a video there as well as a live Zoom. So that's why I'm getting this extra microphone. So anyway, I'm really excited to introduce my friend Austina Bonte, and she's one of my heroes. A lot of us have asked for her to come back by popular demand. And we're really thankful for the things she's taught us to help support our high cap kids. And I'll read a little bit, maybe you saw the flyer about her, but I know she's a mom of high cap kids, has kids in college, but Dr. Austina Bonte is a consultant, researcher, and advocate for gifted and twice exceptional students with Smart is Not Easy. That's, oh, we might have to.
Yeah, so I don't think they can hear on the Zoom.
Oh.
You need to unmute from your account.
Oh, this isn't coming over the Zoom?
Let's try.
Okay, let me finish this and then I'll work on that. How's that? So, and she's also the president of the Washington Coalition for Gifted Education, which I get to be on the board of with her on. And she's the past president of Northwest Gifted Child Association and a member of the Washington State Highly Capable Advisory. She's also a member of the National Association for Gifted Children Public Policy and Advocacy Committee, and lots of other things that I could go on about, but we are glad to have her here. She has her master's degree from MIT and a doctoral degree in twice exceptional education from Bridges Graduate School of Cognitive Diversity and Education. So with no further ado, welcome.
Thank you.
Did you already do something?
I did. I think I fixed the audio. Do you agree? Are they hearing it on Zoom?
I asked if they can hear and nobody answered. I'll take it as a yes. I'll go around the corner. Yes.
Yes? Okay. Excellent. We are cooking with gas, gang. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Austina Bonte. I'm pretty informal. Those of you who know me know you can just call me Austina. Our topic tonight is spiky strengths. Who's heard that term before? Spiky strengths. Oh, okay. Well, you're going to learn what that means in great and gory detail tonight. And I'm going to put the focus in the right place so that my clicker works. Okay, so here's what we're going to talk about today. As I mentioned before, if you are interested in downloading the slides, that QR code will take you there. We are going to start by talking about the dilemma with bright students. We're going to talk about a really key equation between effort and results. We're going to talk about those spiky strengths. But then we're going to realize these kids are actually complex, and there's some complexities we have to understand to really fully put this into practice. We'll take a little side trip into neuroscience. We'll talk about twice exceptional. We don't have time to talk about all the aspects of twice exceptional, but we are going to take a deep dive into ADHD. How many of you have ADHDers in your house? Okay, good. So we picked right. Okay. And then we'll finish up by talking about how we get more flexible, both in the classroom as well as at home, as well as parents supporting what's happening in the classroom, understanding what's happening in the classroom, and feeling good about what's happening in the classroom. Chances are it's happening better than you think once you understand what's happening. All right, so we're going to start with a little cartoon. I drew this cartoon. I'm actually kind of proud of it. This is one of the very first things that I did, I think, from an advocacy perspective. This cartoon's well more than 10 years old. I don't know. Look it up on YouTube. It's on there. Okay, so here's James. James did not know how to write his letters when he entered kindergarten. The teacher says, okay, let's write the letter H, and James says, huh. But with some practice, he learned, and his teacher supported him and said, hey, give it a try. You can do it. And so he made his first little wiggly H, and he said, hey, I did it. I made an H. He was nervous about subtraction. I'm not real sure I can do this, but his teacher was supportive and said, yeah, you can. Here, let's do it together. And he said, like this? And she said, no, not exactly that way. Try this instead. And he said, oh, I got it now. So he had to work through some frustration. He learned that it was okay to ask questions, to try, to not give up at the first hurdle. Okay, here's our other character in this story. Here's Susie. Susie is very bright. She started kindergarten already knowing how to sound out words and was surprised that the other kids didn't know how to read yet. How come the other kids don't know their letters yet? She quickly grew in her abilities, seemingly without trying. 2 beans, 2 more beans, that's 4 altogether. And she makes the logical leap, oh, so 40 plus 40 equals 80, right? As she grew, she easily picked up on new topics. Let's talk about the weather. Oh, I read a book about cumulus clouds once. They're the puffy ones. She often finished assignments early. Class, you have until recess to work on this, but she says, I'm done. What should I do now? Her parents were very proud of her perfect report card and remarked at how easily she learned new things. Susie is a delight to have in class. We're so proud of you, Susie. In kindergarten, Susie asked a lot of questions. Why is the earth round and not square? How do plants know to grow up, but the roots know to grow down? Do plants have brains? But the teacher said, we're not talking about that right now, Susie. After a while, she stopped asking so many questions. By 2nd grade, she realized she didn't have to work very hard to do well in school. Another straight A report card. You're so smart, Susie. She says, yeah, this is easy. No sweat. Meanwhile, James grows, and every school year gradually presents bigger challenges. Can you explain long division one more time? Okay, I finally got it. I had to do 5 revisions for this essay, and it took forever, but I think it turned out really great. James has had lots of practice learning how to attack new hard challenges. He has strategies. Don't give up. Read again. Ask for help. Try, even if you're not sure how to do it at first. James goes to middle school, high school, college, all along learning how to tackle bigger and bigger challenges. I've worked through hard problems before. I bet I can figure this out too. Meanwhile, Susie continues to achieve despite not putting forth any real effort. Wow, Susie, your essay was magnificent. I wrote it on the bus. How do you get so many creative ideas? I don't know, they just pop into my head. She grows too. She starts middle school, does well in her honors classes, English, world history, pre-algebra, chemistry, French. This is easy, just like elementary school, no sweat. But the next year, she takes geometry. These geometric proofs just don't make sense. Why do I need a compass to draw a triangle? I just don't get it. Why can't things just be easy? Her teacher sends a note home that Susie's grades are slipping, and her parents react. But Susie's so bright, how could she possibly be having trouble in math? She's never happened before. Susie, you're just being lazy. You're not trying hard enough. Don't you care about your GPA? Don't you care about college? And Susie starts thinking, I don't know, doing the same thing I've always done at school. I listened. What am I doing wrong? If I was truly smart, I'd know how to do this. Smart people shouldn't have to ask for help. Maybe I was just lucky all those easy times. Maybe I'm not so smart after all. Because Susie's elementary school experience didn't challenge her, she never had the opportunity to develop these skills. Self-confidence, emotional coping skills, delayed gratification, tolerance for failure, study skills, time management skills. She didn't need them. She wasn't in an environment where she needed to develop those skills, so why would she develop them, right? Susie never learned how to learn. And we see this, you guys. We see this in really smart kids who make it all the way through a typical elementary school, middle school, sometimes high school program, get all the way to college, and those college freshman year dropouts, sometimes it's these kids. So let's formalize this a little bit. I call this the bright student dilemma. Most kids learn how to learn in elementary school, like James, okay? Reading, subtraction, multiplication, all that stuff doesn't come easy, right? And most kids need instruction. They need to struggle with it. They develop all these skills: how to tolerate confusion, how to recover from mistakes, how to ask for help. We call that persistence, perseverance, grit, growth mindset. They're all, in my mind, synonyms for the same thing, okay? I often use the shorthand grit, but I'm kind of talking about all that stuff. And also time management and study skills. Usually that stuff doesn't kick in really until middle school when you really need those skills. But here's the problem. Our bright kids already know most of the curriculum before they walk in the door, right? And that has two really important implications. One, they did not have the opportunity to build those skills. Yeah? Because it wasn't hard enough, and what do you need to build those skills for if it's too easy? There's another really important implication that we're going to have to pause on until later in this talk, but I just want to point it out. If there's any sort of twice exceptional disability, it's going to stay hidden if the kid is under-challenged in school. How many of you would say, I have a twice exceptional kid? Yeah, that's a lot of people in this room. Okay, really, really common. So let's hold that thought for later. We're going to come back around to twice exceptional. Let's stay on the grit topic for the moment. All right, so there is some research out there. Let me kind of give you a little research overview on what we understand about grit. How many of you have seen this book, Angela Duckworth's book on grit? It's almost 10 years old now. So she studied successful kids, even adults actually, at West Point, the National Spelling Bee, as well as secondary students. And what she found was the thing that predicted success in all of those formats, all of those areas, was not the things you expected. At West Point, it was not sort of physical prowess, okay? In academic stuff, it wasn't IQ. It wasn't even achievement. The sort of common factor underneath that was predictive of success in those environments was this concept that she ended up calling grit, okay? She found that self-discipline, or grit, predicted academic performance more robustly than IQ. And she did us a really big favor. She measured it, and she came to this conclusion. She said, you know what, actually, grit is usually unrelated or even inversely related to measures of talent. That is, our smartest kids had the least grit. Does it surprise you? Not really, especially once we look at James and Susie, right? But she did us a favor to sort of like show that that is in fact what is happening, sort of at a population level. Okay, if we go back a whole 10 years before that, that is Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset. Who's heard about growth mindset and Carol Dweck? Yeah, I think that's pretty much lingua franca. So let me just give you the real important takeaways that I want to highlight here for us. In her research, she found that kids who were told that they were smart didn't try as hard next time. However, kids who were praised for effort did better, okay? And so the really important takeaways that come directly out of her work: we do not praise our kids for being smart. It's something they were born with. It's not something they have control over. Don't praise kids for things they don't have control over. You're not praising them for having blue eyes either, right? Okay, what we want to praise is effort and progress, where they put forth effort, okay? So you can say things like, keep on trying. Hey, practice really works. Hey, I see that you're really putting a lot of effort into that, okay? Okay, let's go back in time and look at a really classic study because there's some really counterintuitive results from it. So this is the Terman study way back in 1921. This is the guy that actually coined the term gifted because he thought it was a better term than genius. We could debate that one, but that's where he was coming from. He studied, and he was the inventor of the first IQ test. He studied 1,500 students with IQ greater than 140 on his test, and he studied those kids over their whole lifetime, like really over their whole lifetime, like until they died. Now, it was a biased sample. If ever there was a biased sample, it was a biased sample. It was mostly white men, almost entirely middle class, and For the first longitudinal research in psychological science, this study, he was a lousy researcher because he helped his kids. In fact, he called them termites. Isn't that like, there's sort of something weirdly self-referential and a little icky about that. He wrote them recommendation letters. He helped them get jobs. He, like, all the things, right, to like help move them along, okay? Not great for science. But despite that, some interesting things came out. So yes, they got bachelor's degrees at much higher the rate that you would expect, and master's degrees and doctoral degrees, and a lot of those kinds of success criteria. However, there's been a zillion other researchers who have studied and restudied that data. And there's one particular gal, Odin, who compared the 100 most successful and the 100 least successful men, unfortunately they were men, in the group, defining success as holding jobs that required their intellectual gifts. And what they found was the successes and the non-successes barely differed in IQ. IQ was not the predictor. What was the predictor? Confidence, persistence, early parental encouragement. Let me give you some more data. Takeaway, grit matters, and support, right? Much more so than the actual raw horsepower. Okay, another big, long study. Started in 1972, so just before I was born. This was a study called the Study for Mathematically Precocious Youth. They have been collecting kids by doing SAT testing for 7th and 8th graders in middle school. Okay, so it's called out-of-level testing, looking at middle school students who scored really high on those instruments. Okay, and they have a number of different cohorts that they follow, kids who scored in the top 3% all the way to the top 0.01%. And as predicted, these kids eventually do receive bachelor's degrees and master's degrees and doctoral degrees well beyond the base rates that you would expect. On average, they're more successful. And actually, that tippy top group is even more successful than the rest. And that's a debate that happens in the gifted community sometimes. Like, does it actually matter? Is there such a thing as like enough IQ and there's no difference? They said, actually, we see a statistically significant difference. Okay, that's helpful. What they found was that grade skippers were much more likely to fall in that successful bucket. And let's be clear, when we're talking about successful here, we're talking about not the humanitarian kind of success, right? We're talking about, career, stuff that you can measure. We're not talking about whether they were happy or whether they were satisfied with their lives, whether they had great family lives. Like, that's not what they were measuring, right? They were talking about, did they achieve things? Okay, and one of the big things that they found was that when a kid had access to grade skipping, they were much more likely to be successful. In general, they also similarly found that what predicted success was not IQ nearly as much as support and acceleration, access to acceleration, usually through grade skipping, because that's how it was happening in those days. Okay, but I want to show you a little graph from one of the many research articles that came out of that study. And if we use our critical graph reading skills, we'll see a really interesting pattern here. Okay, I'll give you a second to just kind of inhale. And then let me show you something. Notice that scale. Okay, so that's the percentage of people. Let's block out those. We're less interested in those. Let's look at these folks. They call their talent search group the group who did that early SAT testing, who scored way, way high as 7th and 8th graders. Okay, so these are really, really smart kids. Looking at them decades later, in their 30s, okay, 30, I think average age was 35, I want to say, for this part of the analysis, and looking at what was their income. What do you see? I mean, at a glance, it looks good, right? But when you really look at it, what's really happening here? Look at these numbers. So here we are. Here's the guys, males. Here's income, 100 grand and up. So less than 40% of the men had incomes of 100K or higher in 2004 dollars. That means that 60% of the men in this really high performing group actually had kind of moderate incomes. Did you expect that? Okay, look at the ladies. It's even worse. Now this is horrible for gender equality, right? But more than 80% of the women also had salaries less than 100 grand. Okay, so what do we take out of this? Yes, these populations are more successful on average. If you know anything about statistics, based on statistical significance of large groups, right? Yep, there's a statistically significant difference. However, the median, think about the median, right? Most of these individuals, even though they were highly, highly gifted, ended up leading very ordinary lives. Not unsuccessful lives, but just ordinary adult lives. Does that surprise you? It surprises a lot of educators. A lot of teachers sort of go into this assuming that these smart kids have it made, and they don't really need extra support, and they don't really need all that much in school. They're going to be successful no matter what we do. This data would suggest maybe that's not always true, or at least not to the degree that I think people assume. All right, so our smart kids are at a disadvantage. When they are not challenged in school, they're less likely to develop all these skills. These skills, by the way, more important than any subject we teach in school, right? This is adult life skills, right? If you don't have those skills, it's really hard to make it as an adult in our life, in our society, right? At the end of the day, algebra, kind of negotiable. These things, not negotiable, right? And it's hard to truly challenge our kids. They are capable of a lot more than they let on. And they don't always reach for the stretch, right? And so because of that perfectionism, how many would say their kids have sort of a perfectionistic bent? Yeah, common, not every single kid, but very common in our population, right? That often has kids sort of not always stretch as far as they really ought to in order to develop those skills, right? Okay, so the more time that kids spend in a school that's too easy, the more that perfectionism becomes kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? I was successful in that easy place. That was pretty cool. I can be perfect. I don't have to stretch into something that's actually genuinely hard. Okay, so here is the central concept to developing grit. We need our kids to really deeply, in their bones, understand that effort leads to results. Yes? Okay. The problem is that for many of our kids, they're in a lot of environments where they can put forth minimal effort, maybe no effort, get tons of results. Okay? So we're not teaching this equation. Okay? We also sometimes have this feeling like, oh, the way that kids really develop this skill is by struggling with something that's hard for them, often a disability area. How many folks here have kids who maybe like writing is not their thing, writing is hard for them? Okay, and so you sort of have this sense like, oh, once my kid struggles enough with writing and prevails, they're going to realize that that really worked, and they're going to have this feeling like they developed some grit and they know how to do that again. But it doesn't work. Sorry. Because when you're in a disability area like that, you can sometimes put forth effort and sometimes get results. But you can also sometimes put forth a lot of effort and not get results. And so it's not consistent, and therefore it's not teaching this equation nearly as well as it could. The way that we teach this equation most effectively is in a talent area. In an area where a kid is interested, usually, where a kid has some raw talent. They don't necessarily have to be a genius. Actually, in fact, if it's like so easy, then it's hard to make this happen, right? Because they still don't feel effort, right? So, but it could be anything. It could be sports, could be academics, could be math, could be chess, could be robotics. I mean, almost anything. I'm a particular fan of music. I think private music instruction does this sort of naturally without even trying, without even thinking, right? Because if your kid is working with a private music instructor, every week they have a lesson and the kid needs to learn one more little thing, right? And so it's one more little thing that they have to struggle through sometimes, right? They go home and they're like, wait, what did the teacher say again? Oh, I'm not sure I can do it right. And so there's that whole journey that happens over the course of the week, right? And what happens if they don't practice? Then they can't always do it in the lesson, right? And even if the teacher is the most beautiful human on the planet, right, and does not yell at the kid, everybody in that room kind of knows you didn't actually do your practice this week. And guess what? Next week's practice looks a lot like last week's practice, right? And everybody gets the message that, like, oh, it turns out you actually have to put forth the effort in order to get the results, right? That's teaching this equation. Okay, so one major question for you is, what part of your kid's life is teaching this equation consistently? Might be happening at school, might not be happening at school, depending on your kid, depending on the program. Okay, but somewhere your kid needs to be learning this, ideally before they get to middle high school. Okay, so how do we do it? We provide experiences with genuine challenge because we're teaching grit and growth mindset in an area of strength, not an area of disability. Another way to say this in teacher language is Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. Any teachers in the room? Anybody recognize that? Yeah, okay. So Vygotsky, it's very, very good, basic, this is like teacher 101, okay? Kids learn best when they're in their zone of proximal development. Some people call it the learning zone, okay? If it's too easy, they're not learning all that much. They're learning something, but it's more consolidating, it's mastery, it's practice, it's fluency, but they're not learning anything new, okay? Your kid is going to spend some time here, and that's appropriate, but they shouldn't be spending their whole day there, okay? They're going to learn best in an environment where they need a little bit of scaffolding, a little bit of instruction. They actually can't do it fully solo. If they can do it fully solo, you're here, okay? And of course, if it's too hard, then you're in the danger zone where the kid is just overwhelmed, right? So we want to get it just right. This is a Goldilocks kind of thing. All right, so our goal is fairly straightforward. To build grit, every kid should be in their learning zone at least once a day on some topic. Is it the whole thing they're doing all day? Probably not, unlikely. But at least once a day, there's something that's getting them into that zone where they have to experience a little frustration, a little challenge, and be able to work through it. Okay, another thing that I want to offer is a piece of research that I only learned in my graduate program around talent development. Turns out there are these stages of talent development. They're very consistent, even across different domains: athletics, academics, all kinds of things. Stage 1 is exploring. In stage 1, the kid might have a real facility for math, might have a huge facility for soccer, for gymnastics, for music, okay? Could be any topic. But in this stage, it's actually really important that we keep instruction playful and child-led. The goal of stage 1 is to light the fire of interest. It is not to provide systematic instruction. If we push too hard in stage 1, even if the kid has a lot of talent, long term, the kid will turn away from that area because it wasn't fun. Okay? So you can break it. Don't break it. Okay, stage 2 is deepening. Okay? This is a kid-led decision. The kid says, I really love math. I want to do it more. I want to understand it more. I want to do it seriously. I think I want to be a mathematician. Okay? Or insert robotics. Or I want to be a professional soccer player. And I'm going to spend every moment, you know, and I want to go, I want to get on the select team. I want to do all the things. Okay? Usually this does not happen until early adolescence. For just a few things, it can happen earlier: ballet, gymnastics, sometimes math, but actually not as often as you think. Usually this is more like 12, 13, sometimes later. And this is the point when you introduce systematic instruction. The kid's going to learn all kinds of weird little factoids in stage 1. Stage 2 is where you actually glue it all together and you fill in the gaps. You do not try to fill in the gaps up here. That's where you break it. Okay? Stage 3 typically is in later adolescence into adulthood, where the kid really starts developing some serious expertise. At that point, the essential ingredient is a mentor to sort of help that kid bring their performance to the next level. Okay. The reason I bring this up is because many of us get very excited about our kids who can do really cool things when they're very small. And we have this tendency to want to say, like, okay, I need to like do something to nurture this amazing ability. And most of us type A humans need to lay off. Sorry. That, you know, provide lots of exploration. Provide, like Beast Academy is lovely, but if you're using Beast Academy to say you have to do 3 pages before you can do whatever on Friday, you're doing it wrong. Okay? Provide the option, don't require it. And let the kid take a break when they're not interested anymore. Let it be child-led and playful. Okay. We have this sense that we want our kids to be well-rounded. We want them to be able to do the math and the reading and the science and the athletics. And in fact, when I was going to college, this was the formula. Like, you wanted to check all the boxes, okay? But our kids are not like that. They tend to have spiky strengths. They tend to have real interest areas in a particular area where they really want to go deep. And for many of our kids, especially our twice exceptional kids, this is a lot closer to their profile, okay? Where they have some core skills, and it's important for them to develop some core skills, but notice that the core here is smaller than this, right? They're not necessarily going to be super awesome in all topic areas, but boy, they're going to have some spiky strengths in some areas. This is what I mean by spiky strengths. And here's the thing that you need to know. This is what colleges are looking for. Colleges are looking for kids with spiky strengths. When we went to school, when I went to college, colleges were looking for well-rounded humans. They are no longer looking for that anymore, especially when you're talking about the more highly selective schools or the more highly selective scholarships. Okay, so this means it's actually a beautiful thing. It means we can stop trying to fit our kids into this box that may not fit. We can allow them to have those spiky areas. We can actually encourage those spiky areas. Actually, the more that we encourage those spiky areas and the more unique they are, the better that they're going to do from a college admissions perspective, but also from a life perspective. Like that, those are lovely places to develop. What were we just talking about? Grit, right? Persistence, perseverance. The fact that effort leads to results. It's in those spiky areas that kids develop that kind of sense. And also, adults don't have to be great at everything. Do you have to be a Swiss Army knife? Are you great at everything? No. You have things that, and you picked your career based on that, right? That's how you spend your time. We pick our careers based on our strengths, not based on our deficits, not based on our challenge areas, based on our strengths. And in fact, when you have big challenge areas, what do? You find ways to mitigate it. You hire somebody, right? You've got an assistant. You've got a spouse, right? You've got a plan. you're using AI, you are finding some kind of environment or support network that mitigates your weaknesses. Same thing is true for our kids, and it's especially true for the world that they're growing up into. They don't have to be good at everything. Stop trying. Lean into what they're actually interested in. It's good for them as humans, and it's good for them long term. Okay, easy to say. All of that, very easy to say. Hard to do, because these kids are really complex. So let's turn the page and talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about neuroscience. I love neuroscience. Did you know that every brain is unique, just like a fingerprint? Every brain, not just gifted brains. Every brain is unique like a fingerprint. Sometimes we call that uniqueness neurodiversity. We'll come back to that word in a minute. High IQ brains are neurodiverse in predictable ways. We know how to measure it now. Let me show you what that looks like. Here's some things that we know. We know that the high IQ brain is not bigger than the typical brain. Okay, it's a tiny bit bigger, but it's like so small. Like the statistical, yes, it's statistically significant, but the actual effect size is really small. Okay. However, regional brain volume is very different. Certain regions are much bigger. Okay, so if the total size is not that different and certain regions are much bigger, what does that have to mean? Other regions have to be smaller. Okay, and that's what we see. There's denser connectivity between some regions, and there's also sparser connectivity in other regions. We can say now so much more than we ever could before that high IQ brains are physically different. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we couldn't really say that with the kind of confidence that I can stand up here now. Because we got a whole lot of research behind this. And it's fairly new research. And there's more coming out all the time. If you're really interested in this, Grow Gifted is an organization down in California. They actually have this beautiful catalog on their website, and you can go look up all those studies, and they keep adding to it. All right, one of the reasons we think about neuroscience is because it has a big impact on executive function. Executive function, what do I mean by executive function? Well, it's the thing that we kind of wish our kids had, but often they don't. My colleague Sandy Wollum, she says, if I'm so smart, why can't I find my keys, right? We bunch up executive function into two big categories. One, sort of organizational things, another kind of regulatory things. Who's familiar with the concept of executive function here? Good. All right, I don't want to belabor it then. How many of you would say your kids have executive function challenges? All the same hands. Okay. All right, so let's jump into the data. There are physical differences in brain development. Let me show you what that looks like. This is a chart of physical brain development between the ages of 7 and 19. It's looking at the thickness of the brain cortex. So the brain cortex is the outer thinking layer of your brain. If you pulled it out of your head and stretched it out, you can measure the thickness of it. It's actually in your head, so it's smashed together, and that's where the folds come from. Yeah. Thankfully, they can measure the thickness of the brain cortex non-invasively. That's crucial for a large N study with kids. This study looked at, I believe it was 307 kids, pretty sure. And what it did was it measured the thickness of cortex over time, over age, and then it sorted those data by IQ. Okay, and so what you see are some pretty interesting patterns. So that dark line was sort of average IQ. And what's happening down here, we've known about in neuroscience for a really long time. Like in early childhood, pre-age 7, there's sort of this dotted line over here. The cortex is supposed to thicken up. And around age 8, it turns the corner, and then this process of pruning takes place, where the parts of your brain that you're using get to stay, the stuff you're not using gets pruned away. You actually get more efficient that way, less noise in your brain, and thinking becomes more smooth. okay? That's typical development. That's been known for a really long time. That's not news here. What is news is this red line, okay? The red line is kids who had IQ above 121. Actually, that's not a very high cutoff, you guys. Like typical research cutoff for gifted is 130, okay? Which actually makes this data more strong, yeah? Okay, so in that population, they found, look at this. The cortex is still thickening up much longer, thickens up much thicker, doesn't turn the corner until around age 12, 13. And then the process of pruning takes place. Isn't that interesting? Okay. Here's a different set of researchers who found something similar. We're going to come back to that chart in a second. Kids who had higher IQs to begin with seem to have an extended period in adolescence during which they retain the ability to learn at a rapid pace, just like much younger children. You see it? They retain the ability to learn at a rapid pace, just like much younger children. Those other researchers were purely looking behavioral. They were not doing MRIs. But they found very similar corroborating information. Okay, another piece of information that's really helpful to make sense of this is that your brain matures back to front. So that whole maturation process, the pruning process, doesn't happen in your whole brain all at the same time. It starts back here in the occipital lobe, this is vision, and works its way to the front. What's back here behind your forehead? It's your prefrontal cortex, considered the seat of executive function. Okay, so when that pruning process is happening, pruning is starting back here and it's making its way to the front. This is not the first place that gets pruned, you guys. And you see that, right? Okay. All right, so let's put it all together. So we've got this maturation thing that's happening here, where somewhere on the downhill side of the slope, executive function is starting to snap in because we're finally getting to the prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex is not the only piece that's important for executive function, but it is sort of it's an essential piece. It's not the only. But look at our kids on the red line. That same pattern's happening for them too. And the pruning doesn't start until later. And again, executive function is not the first thing that gets pruned. Okay, let me make this really clear. Okay. So our typically developing kids, by the time they hit middle school, they're already on the way down that slope. And executive function is starting to snap in. And with the support of a greater challenge in middle school, right, to have multiple teachers, to have multiple classes, to need to take care of your stuff, maybe to have a locker, to have a little bit more homework, like all the things that go along with middle school, yes? And most typically developing kids can handle it. But what's happening with our kids on the red line in middle school? Yeah, developmentally, they're not there yet. And it really is a yet, right? It's not that they're not going to get there ever, but right this moment, they do not have the structural pieces in place yet to make that set of skills accessible to them. Developmentally, it's just not there yet. But they're in middle school, and they've got all these teachers saying, but you're so smart, kid, why can't you keep track of your stuff? Right? Okay, here's somebody else commenting on this whole business, saying the maturation of the prefrontal cortex of gifted children is often delayed compared to other children, but then catches up unusually rapidly. Notice the slope of this line, right? Okay, so what do we do about all this? We recognize that a lot of our kids are going to be late bloomers, okay? Most of them are going to catch up, but it might take until their 20s. Usually, this is mid to late high school is when most kids turn the corner, but it's very developmental. Remember that this is population data. Your kid might be early on that curve. Your kid might be late on that curve. And occasionally, this is the nature of their disability, and it is never going to snap in, right? And they're the ones who really need that assistance as an adult. Yes? Okay, most important thing for both parents and educators to recognize is that tough love does not work. If your kid hasn't turned the corner yet and the structural pieces are not there yet, there is no amount of tough love that's going to get them there, right? When we think about how kids are graded in school, expectations in school, especially report card grades, you got to ask the question, are report card grades measuring subject mastery, or are they measuring executive function? Whether the kid can hand in the homework, whether they can remember the instructions, whether they can get the thing done the way the teacher wanted them to get it done. And an awful lot of the time, our kids' report card grades are reflecting a lot more executive function than they are the actual content. How do we actually help our kids? They need lots more scaffolding and support for executive function. We want this to not become a psychological problem. Right? We do not want to create a trauma over the fact that the kid's brain is on a different timeline that people don't expect. So I am officially giving you permission to run out of the house with your kid's instrument as they run to the bus without it for the 30th time. Okay? And to help them remember to get all the things and to build structures and checklists and all the things to help them keep it together, because for the most part, these are not skills you can teach. You can build some habits, that helps, but for the most part, they need to borrow your frontal lobe until theirs is cooked. Okay? And so that's how this happens. This, like executive function support, it's roll up your sleeves, actual support. It's not give your kid a book. That's not going to help. Okay, so coming back to the slide, just to remind you all the things we're talking about here. Organization things, organizing things, time, procedures, multitasking, keeping track of more than one thing at a time, time management, breaking down projects from big pieces to little pieces. Many of our kids need a lot of support with this. Those big projects are killer. Regulatory things, inhibition, self-control, impulse control, sustaining attention through distraction, waiting to speak until it's your turn, mental flexibility, black and white thinking, getting started, just initiating things. Those are all executive function things. Okay. Also, tons of overlap with ADHD. Okay, we're going to talk about that a little bit more here in a second. But many of our kids outgrow ADHD. We understand some aspects of that. We'll look at some of that data here in a bit, but we don't understand all aspects of that. I wonder if there is a story related to this data that hasn't been fully understood yet. The research is ongoing. Okay, so how do we support executive function? Who recognizes this gizmo? Okay, what is it? It's a visual timer, sometimes called the time timer. It makes time visual so that you can see the passage of time. Often for our kids, time is this nebulous concept and they do not have an internal clock. And so something like that helps make it more obvious what's going on. Okay, so we want to make time visible, whether that's with a schedule or a calendar or timers, technology. We want to create cues and checklists and charts for everything, and we want to put them as much in the place where they're going to be used. There's a list right next to the door of the things that you need as you're walking out the door to the bus, right? There's a box for your shoes right next to the door, and that's where the shoes go, right? There's a list on the mirror of all the things you need to do at bedtime to brush your teeth, right? Put it right in the right spot. Folders tend to work better for these kids than binders, by the way. If you're a teacher, keep a master binder of all handouts, homework, worksheets in your classroom so that kids don't have to go finding that stuff. Same thing with extra pencils and markers and all that kind of gear. Help kids pre-plan to break down big projects. It's a big place where kids get stuck. Provide graphic organizers and sticky notes and highlighters to help break things down. Provide lots of homework reminders. That's at home and at school. And be flexible with how you judge kids who miss a deadline. Provide class time in school to update the planner, organize backpacks, folders, desks, and make sure that we're following kids' actual plans. You see that I present this data to teachers as well as parents, because it's important for everybody to be on the same page, yeah? Okay, but many of our kids are asynchronous on top of all this. Yes? So here's an example of a 5-year-old. So imagine your favorite kindergartner, right, who's walking into school doing math like an 8-year-old and reading like a 10-year-old, but not writing so nearly so far ahead as reading. Why would that be so different? Yeah, motor skills, right? We're talking about a 5-year-old, right? So there's, definitely some motor skills there. However, writing, as many of you know, is an area that many of our kids persistently have challenge with. So this kid may or may not outgrow that asynchrony. Emotional might actually be below age appropriate. Might be ahead socially in the sense of what they understand, like what does it mean to be a friend, has a more sophisticated conception of that. However, their actual social skills might not match. That's a whole nother talk we'll have someday around how we really understand social development in these kids. But the bottom line is we need to recognize that these kids do develop asynchronously. Most of that asynchrony they don't outgrow, typically. And so it's very common for a kid to have highs in some areas and lows in others, yeah? There is this analogy I use. The gifted brain is like a Ferrari. It's pretty shiny, it's pretty fast. It can do some really cool things, but it can't do everything. Would you take your Ferrari to the beach? Would you take your Ferrari camping? Would you take your Ferrari to pick up the grandparents to take them to the movies? No, depends on the grandparent, maybe. Depends how many grandparents, I think, is really the big question, right? A Ferrari can do many things, and the things that it can do them extremely well. But a Ferrari cannot do all the things. Our kids are very much like that. What they can do extremely well, but that does not mean that they can do all the things equally well. And we make that mistake all the time, assuming that because the kid is high in this, they should be able to have that level of performance across the board. And it's just not true. And there's also a little problem. The Ferrari has a very tiny steering wheel. Not a lot of self-control. Not a lot of ability to maneuver. Tends to go really straight, really fast. From a neuroscience perspective, we can understand this as this concept of inhibition, a lack of inhibition. When you are paying attention, neuroscience tells us that it's not actually that your brain is saying, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. What's actually happening is your brain is saying, don't worry about that, don't worry about that, block that out, forget about that part, so that all that's left is paying attention. That, putting all those other things aside, that's inhibition. There's a growing amount of data that in this population, that ability to sort of shut things off is not so strong. There's a lack of being able to turn things off. So kids easily get overwhelmed. One way that we see that overwhelm is through this concept called overexcitabilities. Who's heard about overexcitabilities before? Okay. So overexcitabilities originated with a Polish social scientist named Dabrowski. They come in 5 flavors. In the original Polish, they translate more directly to superstimulatability. What he noticed was some people have this ability to get sort of extra stimulated in certain areas. Psychomotor, anything having to do with movement. Talks a mile a minute, what runs a mile a minute, super active. These days we might call it hyperactive ADHD, probably a synonym. Sensual overexcitability, anything having to do with the 5 senses. Extra sensitive to light, extra sensitive to sounds, extra sensitive to smells, extra sensitive to touch. Anybody have kids who really have real strong preferences about clothes, right? And seams in their socks and I will wear that but not that kind of stuff. Yeah, very common in our population. Okay, imaginational overexcitability. I can imagine the future so much that actually I kind of lose track on what's real and what's fiction, and actually can lead to a lot of anxiety because I can imagine the horrible and it feels really real. Intellectual overexcitability, what we assume that all these kids have, the drive to know, the why, right? Not all of our kids actually have intellectual overexcitability, even if they've got the horsepower. Many do, but not all. Emotional overexcitability, often the one that's most visible. Really strong emotions, both positive as well as challenging emotions, right? Big mood swings, big shifts. What Dabrowski did not know at the time, but we know now, is that we can see this on an MRI. The IDs, who are actually kind of local, they're in Edmonds, or did this original research. It's a husband and wife team, ID and ID. They saw in the MRI that these kids really are experiencing a more intense reaction in their central nervous system. It's lasting a longer period than normal, and they're reacting to a stimulus that may be very small or even imperceptible to a neurotypical individual. Like, anybody can tell me whether these lights are blinking? Are they fluorescent? No, maybe they're not fluorescent. If they were fluorescent, there'd be somebody in here who could tell me that they're blinking. Because some people notice that, other people don't. Okay, so the deal here with overexcitabilities is that we have to help our kids cope because they're not going to outgrow it for the most part. It's not going to change. And so this is the hardware that they were given, and they need to figure out how to live in the body that they were given. Also, overexcitabilities are not an accident. They support a lot of the higher intelligence things that we see. Some of the times our kids can do things because they hear more, see more, feel more, notice the patterns, have the energy, right? But at the end of the day, what's really going on? There's a lack of inhibition, so they tend to get more overwhelmed by all this input, sensory input, emotional input, etc. Also, from a neuroscience perspective, one of those regions that's bigger is the amygdala. You know what the amygdala is? It's the fairly small region deep in the middle of your lizard brain that is responsible for emotions. Okay, so it should not be a big surprise why our kids tend to be sort of extra emotional. However, the more that we understand about overexcitabilities and the more that we understand about twice exceptional, the more that I'm starting to really think that overexcitabilities is just another language for us to talk about twice exceptional. Most kids who have significant overexcitabilities are actually twice exceptional. And so if you're sitting here saying, yeah, that's my kid, I would urge you to prick your ears up for where we're going next. What is twice exceptional? I'm talking about kids who are bright or gifted or talented. In Washington, we say highly capable, high IQ, and also have some kind of neurodiversity or disability or mental health issues, some kind of challenge at the same time. And the trouble is that their gifts can mask their disabilities, but their disabilities can also mask their gifts. And the more that I work in this space and the more families I consult with, I'm 300 or so at this point, the more I can tell you that our kids can compensate so much more than you think. And those challenges look fairly subtle, but once you realize what's actually going on, you realize that they are pushing a giant boulder uphill. All right, another way to talk about twice exceptional is that our kids are neurodiverse. That neurodiversity word came to us originally from the autism community, but these days we understand it as being much broader than just about autism. We understand neurodiversity that there are different flavors of brains. There are different operating systems, if you will, and they each come with a pattern of strengths and challenges. We do need to be careful that we don't assume that neurodiversity is bad. It's also not necessarily inherently good. It's just different, right? It's just a different way of being. Actually, some really common diagnoses are much better understood as neurodiversity, a different pattern of brain operating. For instance, ADHD. What are the strengths of ADHD? We understand the challenges of ADHD. What are the strengths? Hyperfocus, response time, being able to react quickly under stress. You know who you really want to be ADHD? Your air traffic controllers. We need them right now, right? Yeah. Okay. Dyslexia. Are dyslexic individuals, because the dyslexic brain deprioritizes rote learning it prioritizes contextual learning. They're really good at seeing the big picture, 3D perception, visual spatial, entrepreneurial thinking, creativity, out-of-the-box thinking. Also comes with some downsides, right? By the way, hot tip, dyslexic individuals often have real serious trouble memorizing math facts. Kids with times tables, that's usually a dyslexic sort of side trip. Our autistic kids, real strong strengths with autism. Strengths in spotting details, patterns, logic, sort of seeing the micro, and being able to really hyper-focus on those small things. All right, so what does 2E look like in space? Often what we see, especially in classrooms, is a lot of behavior. Kids are explosive, they're distractible, they can't seem to get their work done, they can talk a mile a minute, but they can't get it on paper. There's this anxiety, there's perfectionism, there's frustration tolerance, they're impulsive. We start talking about them in terms of overexcitabilities, but as I mentioned, I don't think overexcitability is quite the best word to talk about this. But they often get misunderstood, right? Where it looks like they're lazy or unmotivated, or they just don't care, or is this kid really gifted? They don't look all that gifted, right? Probably a lot more gifted kids are twice exceptional than we think. We are underdiagnosing a lot. I have a paper in progress where I've got a really cool set of data, and I think the number is going to be well better than 50%, which is really exciting to be able to actually put in published research. Okay, behavior is communication. When a kid's having a hard time, you're going to see it in behavior. Who's heard of Ross Greene? It's not that kids won't do something, it's that they can't, right? Kids do well if they can. Mona Delahook, who's heard of Mona Delahook? Yeah, she's fabulous. Highly recommend her books. We want to stop addressing behaviors to think more about where are they coming from, right? So that we understand our kids more deeply. I'll add my own 2 cents here. It's never about lazy. In all my time working with families, it's never that the kid needs to try harder. When there's a problem, there's a reason. We got to go find the reason. When we find the reason and support the reason, fix the reason, whatever things we can bring to bear, things get better. Sometimes we are a little nervous about diagnosing. We're nervous about labels. This is not my quote, but it really made me realize, like, yes, we really do need those labels. I'll just read it. This comes from Instagram, the wisdom of Instagram. Because there is comfort in knowing you are a normal zebra, not a strange horse. Because you can't find community with other zebras if you don't know you belong. And because it is impossible for a zebra to be happy or healthy, spending its life feeling like a failed horse. That says it better than I ever could. But the important part is that the label is accurate and that we've actually got the whole story. Because often we stop at these umbrella diagnoses, ADHD, and we think that that tells the whole story. Autism, we think that tells the whole story. But often there's a lot more texture going on there, and actually it's the texture that often helps us figure out how to really support that kid to make their life better. All right, so when we've got accurate diagnosis, we can help build positive self-concept. We don't want this lazy, unmotivated, try harder business. We don't want to miss opportunities to support. We don't want to be throwing spaghetti against the wall, trying this, trying that, trying that, trying that, when it doesn't work, right? And then everybody gets frustrated that nothing seems to be working. We don't want to waste time that could be spent developing strengths, because ultimately that's where we want to spend most of our time, right, is developing spiky strengths. Also, early intervention works better, especially for dyslexia. If for those of you who have littles, there's any hint of dyslexia, do not wait. Dyslexia intervention in 1st or 2nd grade, twice as effective as a year later in 3rd grade. We need to get much better at identifying this in our young kids. And these kids are so good at masking and compensating. And it's probably not just one thing. It's probably multiple things. Our kids need to know that they're playing the game in hard mode. They need to know that not everybody is struggling with the same things that they're struggling with. right? But there's power in that. If you can predict what's going to be hard for you, you can plan for it. If you can't predict and you don't understand what's going on, you feel like you're standing on quicksand. We don't want our kids to be feeling like that. We want them to be able to be planful and to really know how to make the best use of the brain and the body they were given. All right, so I use this analogy quite often these days. I call it bucket theory. Everybody's got a bucket. Your bucket holds things that are hard for you. Here's your bucket. Okay. As you do difficult things, your bucket fills up. Eventually, if we ask you to do things that fit within your bucket, you can be fairly resilient. Yeah? But if we ask you to do things that are too hard for you and we fill up your bucket and we overfill your bucket, what happens? Typically, that's when we see the behaviors, yeah? Okay, in little kids. But sometimes, especially in our girls, but not always girls, kids go in, right? And we don't see it so often. We don't see it so obviously what's going on, right? That can get scary, right? Because our kids are not showing us that they're actually getting overwhelmed, right? And as kids get older, they tend to find other ways to compensate and mask their difficulties. And they're not always healthy. So when your bucket is overflowing, regardless of how you express it, you're overwhelmed. So what we want to do is we want to understand what is taking up so much space in your bucket, because when a kid's bucket is overflowing all the time, it's really easy to say, well, what's the last thing that happened? What's the trigger? Okay? And we can come up with lists and lists and lists of triggers. But that's not the problem. The trigger was not the problem. The problem was that the bucket was so full that it only took the trigger to tip them over. Yeah? Okay. Trigger was not the issue. The issue is what is taking up so darn much space in this kid's bucket. Those are typically our twice exceptional diagnoses that this kid is masking and compensating for madly, but it's using up a lot of their stamina and their energy, so they don't have a whole much left for daily life. So what do we want to do? We want to figure out what those rocks are in your bucket. Some of them we know how to get them out. Some of them we can at least make them smaller. Or even if we can't do anything about them, at the very least we can self-understand and predict, this is going to be hard for me. Okay, let's make a plan for how I'm going to tolerate that. All right, we want to look for root causes. We see all these symptoms and behaviors and challenges, but we got to go deep, deep, deep to understand the causes of what's going on. Right, so we want to find all the causes. We're going to need different practitioners. My vote is you start at the foundations, vision, auditory, reflexes, really foundational stuff. Work your way up from there. Because there's going to be different strategies for different causes, whether it's interventions or tools, accommodations, or just having a much more neurodiversity affirming approach. Because there's a lot of stuff that could be going on. That stuff can get diagnosed by a neuropsychologist or a clinical psychologist. But that stuff, every single one needs a different professional. You want to really know what's going on with your kid? You need a whole team. We don't have time to talk about all these things tonight. That's a whole nother talk. But we are going to take a little spotlight on ADHD. Okay, so how would you know if your kid had ADHD? Chances are the things that you would be seeing would be stuff like this. The kid has trouble getting started. They have trouble staying on task. They have trouble with time management. They have trouble with breaking down big projects. Does this sound like the neuroscience stuff? Yeah? It's a lot of overlap there. Trouble with executive function. But guess what? They can produce when they're interested in the topic. Who recognizes this pattern in their kid? Yeah. Okay. The diagnosticians would say there are three types. You can have inattentive ADHD, you can have hyperactive ADHD, you can have a combined type. But that's not as interesting as understanding what's really going on here, okay? Because we assume that ADHD is some kind of deficit in attention. It's what it sounds like, the word attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But that's actually not what it is. What it is a difficulty changing your attention. Actually, our ADHDers have a great ability to hyper-focus. They have great attention, when it's something that is of interest to them. Okay? It's when we ask them to change their attention on something that is not of interest to them, that's where the problem shows up. They actually can focus when it's INCUP. You are going to learn this. This is your secret decoder ring. It's going to make your life easier. It comes from William Dodson. Okay, this is the 5 categories of things that the ADHD brain can focus on without trouble. You make things I, interesting. N, novel. Ooh, shiny. I've never seen that before. Yeah. C, challenging. Not too easy. There's got to be some challenge to it. Ooh, I wonder if I can do that. Ooh, I wonder if I can get it done that quickly. Ooh, I have a goal. That's why goal setting works. Okay. I have some ambition about something. Okay. U, we put some urgency behind it. It is due. There is a deadline, right? We tend to overuse you. Stop overusing you. It burns everybody out. Okay. It works, but it should not be your go-to all the time. Okay. P, pressure, often social pressure. Oh, I love that teacher and I don't want to let them down. Teacher relationships, so important, right? It can be the make or break with one teacher versus another teacher. The ADHD kid can perform for that teacher, not for that teacher because of the relationship. Oh, I'm doing this group project with these friends that I really like and I don't want to let the group down. I'll get it done. Okay, and they can actually get their brain to turn on enough to get it done because of that social pressure. So, what does not work? Things that are rote, things that are boring, even if it's easy, even if it's very, very important, does not turn on the ADHD brain. There's no amount of willpower that changes that equation. Okay? We call this an interest-based nervous system. Remember neurodiversity? This is a flavor of neurodiversity. The flavor is this brain only turns on when it's interested. Okay? But now you know how to make your brain interested. Because this is how you self-hack your ADHD brain. This is how you hack your kid's ADHD brain. This is how you teach your kid how to actually be successful with the hardware that they were given. Okay? You figure out how to make everything that they're doing either interesting, novel, challenging, put some urgency behind it, or have some social pressure behind it. It requires some creativity, but it can be done. Why does this matter? I couldn't find a really good academic reference for this, but you see it on the internet all over the place. And I don't actually doubt it, because I think it's probably not far from the truth. It makes a nice picture, at least. It's estimated that a child with ADHD receives 20,000 more negative comments than their peers by the age of 12. I don't know. Who buys it? Who thinks that's true? Yeah, it might not be 20,000. Maybe it's 10,000. Maybe it's 5,000. But it's way too many. Whatever the number is, it's way too many. So let me show you some research. Real peer-reviewed research. Most very recent stuff. Movement in ADHD kids increases reaction time and even brain oxygenation in one of those key prefrontal cortex regions. ADHD kids move more when they need more working memory. Fidgeting, even in ADHD adults, appears to increase sustained attention. ADHD kids who had more intense movement had better performance on a cognitive task. Note, typically developing children performed worse with movement. Some kids really do need to sit still, but other kids don't, and it doesn't help. The theory is that movement is actually a compensation strategy to help maintain alertness in the ADHD brain. That movement is helping turn on something important. And so our kids are not moving because they don't care. Our kids are moving because they're trying. And it actually works. And when we tell them to sit down and sit straight and stop moving, we're getting in the way. We need to let these kids move. It actually helps them think. That's a big mind shift for parents, for teachers, for the community. Find ways to let your kids move. Okay, let's talk about meds for a minute. There is a ton of research on this top one. This is just the most recent study I was able to find. It was a meta-analysis that pulled together a whole bunch. Undiagnosed or late diagnosed ADHD adults who had never had medication as kids have higher risk of anxiety, depression, substance abuse, a couple other things as well, but particularly strong in those areas. There is a ton of research on this, you guys. When a kid who really needed meds did not get meds, there are after effects in adulthood that last. Not just the psychological impact of somebody continually telling them you're lazy and unmotivated and would you get your stuff together, right? But actual real impacts in terms of quality of life. Lots of research on that. But here's the really interesting newer stuff. So here's a meta-analysis of 11 studies that showed that structural brain differences in ADHD reduce with age and with stimulant treatment. Stimulants actually help normalize brain structures. Here's some more. Therapeutic oral doses of stimulants decrease alterations in brain structure and function in subjects with ADHD. Long-term stimulant treatment may normalize structural brain changes. 41 ADHD adults who tried stimulants for the very first time, they saw a normalizing effect of that stimulant treatment in their brain structures, visible on an MRI after only 3 years in adults. I first saw this research years ago when it was talking about prepubescent boys, that if we gave stimulants to boys early, before puberty, that for many of them, they no longer needed their medication after puberty because it appeared to have some sort of therapeutic effect. I'm actually really thankful that I had the opportunity to build this talk, to go look at this research one more time and say, oh my God, there's so much more. There's so much more. And so for those of you who are on the fence about medication, I was on the fence about medication. You know, if you had come to me consulting with your kid 5 years ago, I would have said, you know, let's try these other things first. These days, when we know better, we do better, right? The data is really clear that when kids need it, they really need it. So let's understand these meds just a little bit better. They're stimulants, okay? I'm talking about first-line stimulant meds for ADHD. Stimulants have stimulant effects. What do you see in stimulants? That would happen in any human. You would see appetite suppression. You'd see heart racing, anxiety, irritability, fast talking, fast moving, high energy. Yeah? Okay. But when we give stimulants to the ADHD brain, different things happen. Okay? So when the meds are beneficial for ADHD, we see a totally different list of impacts. We see sometimes these really, actually often, these really like dramatic, wow, the sun is out, colors are brighter, everything is so much better. Like, it's not a subtle difference, it's a big difference. Who has seen that in their kid? Have you tried ADHD meds? Ooh, okay, you guys are gonna spend some time thinking about this later. Okay, it makes your kid calmer. They say they have less racing thoughts. They have less impulsivity. Oops. And so I want you to know this difference because it's crucial to dialing in the meds. And unfortunately, our local providers, some of them are excellent, but some of them are eh. And you need to be a savvy consumer to know how to actually make this work. So what you do is you start meds at a low dose. You trial up little by little until you see some effect. You should start at a dose that's low enough that you see no effect, okay? When you see some effect, now you know that it's enough for you physiologically to do something. And then you say, am I seeing those effects or am I seeing those effects? Okay? There's also a couple different classes of stimulants. If you're not seeing the right effects with that class, try the other one before you give up. Sometimes they're very, very different. Yeah. I know, because it's a totally different brain. And so the same substance has a completely different impact on the ADHD brain than it does on a neurotypical brain. Yeah. Yeah.
Do the brain changes
Okay, so the question is, does the stimulant medication have impact on giftedness? I have not seen research that addresses that question directly, but I have never seen any data that would make me suspect that it did. That may not be totally satisfying, but that's what we know. Yeah. Okay, so what I want to encourage you to is, if you're thinking, gosh, maybe my kid actually would benefit from meds, give it a go. They flush out of the system so quickly. They're so easy to trial. It's not something that you have to spend days and days and days on. In 24 hours, you'll know which category you're in, okay? All right, what else can we do? Okay, yes, meds, but we can support executive function. We got to lend our frontal lobe. We got to provide active support. We're not just teaching skills. One tool is body doubling. Just sit with your kid. You do something that is work, whatever it is. Do your taxes, do your whatever. I don't care what your work is, but you do your work while they do their work right there. And actually just being there and everybody doing their work together actually helps the kid get their work done, right? Is a beautiful thing about mirroring and the human brain and neuroception and all that stuff, and somehow it just works. We call it body doubling. Okay, some accommodations that you might put into a 504 plan, for instance. Allow your kid to stand at a standing desk, get them a wobble chair, get them some kind of alternative seating that allows them to move. If they really need to move, if you've got a kid who you know really needs to move, what you ask for is they need a walking lane. They need a place in the back of the classroom where they can pace back and forth. Not where they're bothering anybody, but where they can just move, because moving their body helps them pay attention. Pull up the research if you need to help use that to convince somebody. Fidget items really do work for many kids. Adjust assignments to align with student interests. Remember INCUP? You can ask your teachers to help you in that quest. A small group or a quiet area for assessments also usually helps. You know what's the number one thing that is on 504 plans for kids with ADHD that does not help? More time. More time does not help. Why does more time not help? Yeah, it's still not interesting, and you took away the urgency. So all you did was you delayed the problem, right? You didn't help the problem, you delayed the problem, okay? Now, if there's a different disability, let's say dyslexia, dysgraphia, you may really need more time, right? And it is entirely possible for those two things to be happening at the same time, okay? But if the only issue is ADHD, more time is not actually the answer.
How do you balance it when there's ADHD, but there's anxiety and OCD and other things that make having assignments come due create?
Yeah, in that case, you're going to need extra time, and you're going to need all kinds of other supports. Well, it's not making the ADHD worse. What makes it better is addressing the ADHD aspect. You got to make it interesting. INCUP. Find some way to make it INCUP, and address the rest of the things in the system at the same time. Okay, one place where this tends to get really tricky for folks is in writing. Okay, so when a kid has to write an essay, and you say, okay, let's write an essay on whatever, elementary, middle school, high school, doesn't matter, okay? For many of our kids, especially our ADHDers, but many of our kids, they don't know where to start, right? Writing is very, very linear. You got to start somewhere. What's the first word you're going to write? Well, if your brain looks like this and you got lots of ideas and they're all interconnected, where's the starting point? Right? But you got to write it one word at a time. So how do you help a kid through that transition? There is a tool that I learned from a tutor a number of years ago that is just, it's the key. The key is you have to help kids get ideas out of their head in a messy way, not in an organized way, in a messy way. Okay, and then once their ideas are out there and they can look at them in some form, Then they organize. You have to break it up into those 2 steps. Okay? So how do you actually do that? You might do with sticky notes. It's the easiest one to sort of conceptualize, right? Okay, what are all your ideas for this whatever? Let's write each idea on a sticky note. You pile up a whole bunch of sticky notes, and now you have sticky notes so you can move around and say, okay, that looks like one paragraph, and that looks like another paragraph. Maybe that's different. Maybe these ideas are not in this essay, right? But you can do it other ways. Some folks are more visual. You can draw yourself a mind map. You can draw pictures. You can dictate. If a kid is really having trouble and they just can't do it themselves, have them dictate to you and have you scribe. You write down everything that the kid says. You do that and then hand it back to them. Don't clean it up. Just hand them back what they said. For some kids, having them walk and talk with somebody else helps them organize their thoughts, even if it's not fully out there. But we need to help our kids figure out what works for them. What doesn't work? The graphic organizer that I know you've seen, right? Why doesn't it work? You should know now, right? Because it's too much order too soon, right? They don't know yet what goes in paragraph 1. That's the problem, right? So we need to get ideas out before we organize them. The graphic organizer, great for step 2, not for step 1. Okay, now that said, after we've had this whole conversation about ADHD, there's a whole lot of ADHD lookalikes. There are a whole lot of other things that can look and smell and act exactly like ADHD. And in fact, a neuropsych eval rarely can tell the difference. So, if you try meds and you only get stimulant impacts, you don't get any of the sun is brighter impacts, start thinking about maybe it's actually a lookalike. It's not actually ADHD. Maybe. The things that I see most common here, vision processing disorders, auditory processing disorders, sensory issues, retained reflexes, sleep apnea, allergies, other sort of medical stuff, all the way to even down to pandas. That's a whole different talk to get into all that stuff. But we need to recognize that our kids might have really different needs in all these different areas. And so our job is we have to honor that they've got a lot of individual differences. We need to provide supports to maximize learning. We need to keep supporting until development catches up. Above all else, we need to protect from psychological harm. Who's here has heard of polyvagal theory? Okay. This is a theory that comes from a guy named Porges. He says, the autonomic nervous system is constantly evaluating your environment for safety. Your nervous system, even at this very moment, is taking in thousands of bits of information per second about the lights and the sounds and the environment and the people sitting next to you and what you're noticing about this environment. And it's basically constantly asking yourself, am I about to get eaten by a tiger? Is there something here that I need to react to? And because you're an adult and you've had a lot of experience, you're pretty comfortable in this environment. You're pretty sure you're not going to get eaten by a tiger. I look pretty safe. The other people around you look pretty safe. You're not seeing anything awful. And so you're fairly calm. Yeah, most of you. Or you're hiding it really well. Okay? But our kids tend to be very sensitive. They don't have that range of experience. And so they often notice little things that make them go, oh, is that something I need to worry about? Is that something I need to worry about? Okay. So that puts us on this ladder over here. This is a simplified version of the ventral or the vagus nervous system. Your vagus nerve is this big chunky nerve that runs through your body, connects all of your major organs, starts in the brain. And that's sort of the core of this approach, is that saying your vagus nervous system has basically 3 states that it can be in, okay? When you're happy and everything's going cool, we call it you in a ventral vagal state. But if your nervous system says, ooh, I think there might be some danger about, right? You get into the sympathetic state that we call fight or flight often, but really there's more states than that, right? Fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flop, right? And what that is your nervous system saying, we got to take action. We got to do something. There is a problem here. We got to do something. Yeah? And if the danger gets too big and it's unmitigated, eventually the nervous system kind of gives up and goes down into this dorsal state. And that's when kids are really fully overwhelmed. They're fully shut down. They're usually not thinking very clearly. And when you have a full-blown meltdown, the kid's at the bottom of the ladder. Okay, so if you've got a kid who's here, how do you get him back up there? The magic is something called co-regulation. That kid's nervous system is looking for other trusted nervous systems that are calm. It's looking to see you, adult in the room. Did you see that thing? Did you hear that thing? Are you worried about that thing? And if your nervous system is exuding, everything's okay here, their nervous system says, okay, maybe it's actually okay. But if your nervous system is a little agitated, maybe for completely different reasons, right, that kid is going to be like, oh, there really is danger here, right? And now they get wound up even further. Okay, this is why I'm telling you this, because the most important thing that you need to do to help your kids or teens re-regulate, or adults even, is to do your own deep breathing. Because without saying a word, their nervous system is looking in your eyeballs at your nervous system and it knows what's happening. Okay? There is no amount of everything's going to be okay here that's going to change that. You actually have to be calm. You can't fake it. Sorry. And that's hard. That's hard. So when your kid is in this state, and certainly when they're in that state, less words, more deep breathing, calm presence in the room. That's what works. Don't try to problem solve. It's not the moment. Okay, so other big takeaway from this is that we need to create a neurodiversity affirming environment where our kids can be their authentic self, where they've got a safe environment in all these different ways. Safety with their teacher and their parents, safety in their classroom and at home, safety with their classmates and their family, right? We need them to stay in that ventral vagal state because that's the only place where they're going to learn. It says learning under there, believe it or not. Okay. This is kind of a challenging picture. I'll let you take it in. You seen a poster like that in your kid's classroom, perhaps? Full body listening, eyes looking, hands still, mouth closed, body still, ears on, have quiet hands. You seen that? Yeah, I think we all have. Okay, the caption here says, rewarding neurotypical learning styles teaches all kids that neurotypical brains are superior. This is harmful to neurodivergent kids. See it on black and white, it's sort of obvious, right? But so many of us make this mistake, right? If we really want to create a neurodiversity affirming classroom and home environment, we need to allow kids to be different. They have different needs. Our ADHDers need to move. They need to move. They cannot sit still. Our autistic kids often also need to move for different reasons, right? Asking kids to do this, yeah, it works for some of our neurotypical kids. And in fact, it is even ideal for some of our neurotypical kids, but it is not ideal for all of our kids. And so if we want to create a fully safe environment where everybody can be who they authentically are, we have to allow a lot more flexibility. So one way that we do this in schools is through universal design for learning. There are 3 different aspects here. First is you offer multiple means of engagement. We make the topic meaningful. I summarize this in, I'm interested in learning this. The teacher finds a way to make it interesting to every student. You hear INCUP under there? Yeah. Okay. Then we want to use multiple means of representation and provide lots of accommodations so that kids can learn in the best ways for them. What does that look like? Well, here's a thought. When kids are young, we spend a lot of time on basic skills. But the balance really needs to shift as kids get older to higher order thinking, problem solving, deeper topics, right? And the way that we do that when a kid has various disabilities or neurodiversity is we provide accommodations to make sure that kids have full access to this, even if some of this isn't fully snapped in. Okay? Now, we have to get better about being okay with this as parents, right? Stop trying to make the well-rounded kid. More important that your kid has access to the higher level thinking than that we drill the math facts one more time. Because it ain't going to make a difference. After a certain point, it's not going to make a difference. Focus on what the kid is good at. Build those higher level skills, especially in their strength area. Okay, last aspect of UDL is multiple means of expression. Allow students to show what they know in different ways. Modify assignments to highlight students' strengths. Build up my Spiky strength area. And this is where we come back around to Spiky strengths. I told you it was going to happen. Okay, so how do we do that? We allow kids to do things in different ways. One kid can do a project by making a diagram or a poster or a slide presentation or a comic strip or a podcast or a video, or they make a 3D model, or they write a letter to their congressman. We give them choices, right? We create flexible assignments that encourage creativity, that build on student strengths to do things different ways. Not every kid has to do the same thing. Notice none of those options was write an essay, but that could be an option too, right? Because at the end of the day, we want that. Yeah? And also, it's not harming their long-term chances. So stop, get that out of your head. Like long-term for them as a human and for them in college and for them in adulthood, Spiky is the way to go. Okay, sometimes this really sticks with people, so I'll offer you this image. Be a talent scout, not a deficit detective. This comes from the University of Connecticut and their gifted education center that they have there. We want to spend lots more time and effort on building strengths. Stop spending so much time on trying to remediate deficits. So we want to give not more work, we want to give different work. Gifted education does not mean extra classwork. It doesn't mean a pressure cooker environment. We want effort to lead to results, right? Where does that happen best? In a strength or interest area. We want every kid to be in their ZPD at least once a day. And it's going to look different for every kid because every kid has a different Spiky strength area. Okay, bottom line, smart is not easy. If you've heard me talk before, you've seen this slide. Not emotionally, not socially, not academically, not for grit, not for executive function. These kids don't have it easy. Often it's a mismatch with the environments that we put them in. So why do we serve these kids? Why do we have public school programs? Why do I spend so much time consulting with families? Why do I think that this is crucially important? Why do I spend so much of my time and nonprofits in the state and nationally, et cetera? Because this is a special needs population. And if we don't do something different, it doesn't always work out all right. We are not trying to create eminent leaders to send more kids to Harvard. We're not trying to win national math competitions. Like, that's not the point. We're trying to help kids for whom the system was not built for them develop enough of the core life skills they need to be functioning citizens in our society. That's the goal. They're not necessarily going to make $1 million, you guys. We saw that data already. I have no reason to refute it. Okay? It's not going to happen. But we also want them to not be unsuccessful, right? We want them to be able to be functioning humans in our society. They're not going to build those skills if we don't do something different because everything is too darn easy for them. And it hides all the challenges until the challenges get so big that they become really difficult to figure out, often when kids are older. When families come with me with teenagers, it's a much harder conversation because at that point the patterns are so ingrained and it's a lot harder and it takes a lot longer to unwind. All right, so if you're looking for these slides, that's the QR code. If you're looking for the slides on all the twice exceptional stuff that you're now thinking about going, oh gosh, I wonder, those are over there. And thank you. Do you need to change a battery? No, she says she's good. Okay, I am happy to take a couple questions if folks want to stick around. Yeah. So the question is, what about these kids in video games? Do I have any advice about that? So I don't think video games are evil, actually. And especially in the land of esports, it creates an environment where they can actually develop the effort leads to results equation. Right? Actually, video games are particularly good at teaching kids that when you put forth effort, you get results. And if you don't put forth effort and you don't try, then you can't finish that level and you can't beat the big bad boss man. Right? So is that the only place where I would like your kid to practice that skill? Probably not. But is it harming anything? Not necessarily, unless it's the only thing that they're doing. So I'm more of a fan of let's make sure that there's at least a little bit of balance. But truth be told, like a kid who really knows the video game environment and maybe starts programming and maybe starts doing graphic design and really understands what makes something fun, like that's a lucrative career. So I'm not a like no video games kind of person. For the right kid, it actually can be a path. It might be their spiky strength. Other questions, thoughts? Yeah.
I'd guess that you'd refer back to the zebra, but when you have a kid who says on the daily, why can't I be normal? Why is everything so hard for me? Like, how do you, obviously you work on the grit and you do all the things you said, but like any other ways to just help build that confidence that this is a gift and it's hard, but we can do it.
Yeah, so how do you talk to a kid about the challenges, both the gifts and the challenges, right? That neurodiversity word is really huge, right? Teaching kids about neurodiversity, and there's getting to be more and more resources out there. Go look on Amazon. You can find lots of kids' books for whatever age is appropriate, from littles up to teens. To talk about the fact that actually everybody's neurodiverse in something, right? And actually an awful lot of this community is neurodiverse. And what does that look like? And help them feel not alone. Finding other kids who have similar challenges, there's almost no substitute for that, right? So that those kids can sort of be their own support group and their own support network. Sometimes, depending on the uniqueness of your kid, you have to work pretty hard. If you've got a super brilliant kid with a really interesting complex profile, that might mean that you're driving a federal way to find that kid, right? They may not be in Shoreline or even in the Seattle metro area, depending on how unique your kid is, right? But parent groups like this can be a huge help to help find those connections. You got to raise your hand and say, I got a really quirky, unique kid with this kind of profile. Anybody else have one like that who's like 13, 14 years old? I'm guessing. Yeah.
On top of that, so you would say any ways we can encourage schools to group kids together in ways that they can learn together?
Yeah, so the fact that when schools can provide program models where they group kids together, it has huge impacts in terms of social development and in terms of sort of emotional regulation, because kids see that they're not the oddball, right? When we put them in environments where they're always kind of the odd duck, that has an impact, right? And we need to be careful about that long term.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, please.
You talked about the strengths and disabilities in our kids in different areas. So if a kid has autism, for example, disabilities in writing, for example, and strength in something else, do you help them more in their strengths to more focus and like support them in their strengths and with the disabilities or vulnerabilities?
Yeah, so the question is, so if you've got a kid who's got a strength in one area and maybe a disability in another area like writing, do we really put more effort and time into the strength? into the disability. After about age 10, 12, before then, you know, there's a point where it's effective until age 8 or 10 or so, depending on what's going on, depending on the kid developing, depending on development. But at some point when you reach that plateau and you're not making any more progress, stop banging your head against the wall. Right? It's not like if it's a disability, it's a disability, right? Bring in the assistive technology tools, get that kid typing, get that kid dictating, get them learning AI, right? AI is actually burgeoning to be kind of an interesting tool for some of our kids with writing challenges, right? Because it can kind of get them unstuck, right? We're still learning the fine points of how to use it properly, but it has real promise there, right? So figure out the tools and the environment and the network that's going to make it possible for that kid to work in the real world. Yeah, but don't make them do it by hand on a pencil if that's not working for them. Or, you know, without a spell check. Like, let them use the tools. Yeah.
I'm trying to put together, you know, the part where things are too easy, you know, that whole line of thought you are talking about, and then developing grit, but you don't want to, the thing that would be harder for them, it seems like that could be a way to develop grit, but you actually want to go with a thing that's easier. I'm trying to like put that all together and when and what degree, because I could think, you know, like if it was a kid where the frustration tolerance got in their way or they got demotivated, I could totally see that, but if it's not that case, that situation, then why wouldn't it potentially be a way to develop grit, you know, unless it has to do with like a condition, a disability, or even just like, as you're saying, like with ADHD or something, you know, that's like it has to be introspaced, you know, you don't want them to feeling bad about themselves. So I just wouldn't, or at a minimum, wouldn't at least not just focusing on the strengths, but also, you know, wouldn't that just kind of raise the bar up some of the stuff that is within, maybe it's never going to be neurotypical, but it's going to bring it up from what it would be if you just focus on the strengths.
All right, I'm going to try to summarize that without repeating the whole thing. So tell me if I've got the essence of it, right? Why can't we build grit in the difficulty area? Right? Why doesn't that work that well? And the reality is, if you really put a ton of effort into it, you can build grit there. But it's like so the hard way. It's really the hard way. And for most kids, if that's a challenge area, it's probably always going to be a challenge area. And so the gains that you get are small. And they don't feel very satisfying. And in terms of the kid's long-term sort of ability level, you don't win all that much. The ROI is low, okay? Whereas the ROI is much higher if you lean into a kid's strengths. You actually build grit a lot faster because it's a much clearer effort leads to results consistently. I put forth effort, I get the results. I put forth effort, I get the results. In a challenge area, sometimes you put forth the effort, you don't get the results. And so it's not a clear equation. Does that make sense? So yeah, you can, but you're doing it the hard way. And especially with older kids, it can be much more frustrating, right? Especially when we have kids who are, you know, let's say adolescents, even early adolescents. It can be so much more satisfying for them to really blossom in a talent area, and it provides so much more self-confidence, where they're like, oh, there's something I am really good at, and I love it, and I can really do this. And sometimes all the other challenges become not so mentally heavy in that environment.
Could you provide an example of like a strength where you build grit, like how you would up that? I mean, it's like math, that's very easy because that is very linear.
Sure.
But in some other areas, what would that?
All right, other strength areas other than math.
Yeah, and how you would know it was a stretch if it's like a strength anyway.
Well, anything can be a stretch if you, often with a private instructor is the easiest way to do that, where a private teacher can always kind of have the next thing and the next thing and then the next thing. Group instruction, often it's hard to target to a particular kid because the teacher isn't always thinking about your kid at that moment. Music, I think, is a huge area there. Sports, I think, is a huge area with the right coach, right? Individual sports is easier than group sports. Fencing, golf, swimming, that kind of stuff. There's another big one that shows up a lot in our community, but I'm forgetting it. Oh, martial arts is another big one, right? And actually martial arts, because like especially with karate, with the very sort of structured, like you get this belt and you do these things, right? There's a real clear progression. And so for some of our kids who really need to have it like very well spelled out, that can be very satisfying. Yeah. Any other examples that folks have? Give her some ideas. I'm not the only one here with ideas, you guys. Seriously, give her some ideas. What other things are strength areas where a kid could really build that skill set?
Chess?
Thank you.
Art, different types of, drawing or different mediums of art.
Yeah, different mediums of art. Filmmaking.
Running for my kid, how much he can do a half mile and then go further and time him and tell him his time. He gets super driven by that.
Robotics. For a lot of our kids, robotics is a big deal. Computer programming. Did you know that there is competitive computer programming even for middle schoolers? Esports. Any other ideas before I take the next question?
Lydia?
Okay. Yeah.
Very, very clear. It's very, very clear which kids are practicing and which kids are not practicing. And it's very clear, so for example, with my older one, they went from practicing 45 minutes a day to 30 minutes a day, and it's very clear that the progress slows down. And then the kid who used to be a few songs behind them in the CGP book, quickly overtook them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so Suzuki music, absolutely. I have had experience with that also. And actually, when you're in a Suzuki environment where kids play with each other, not just your kid solo with a teacher, they can kind of judge their progress with other kids and realize oh, maybe I should be doing something different here, right? It's also can just be really fun to play with other kids. Like music with other kids is just an inherently beautiful human thing. Yes, in the back. Yeah. Okay, I'm up for a challenge. Let's go find it. It's pretty far back there, but we'll get there. We've talked about a lot of stuff tonight, you guys. Yeah, real quick review. Okay, there we go. Okay, so you want to pick a domain? Music? Music? Okay. Music is like, for me, that's a softball. It's so easy. Okay. So Suzuki music instruction, let's say Suzuki violin, Suzuki viola, cello, piano even. Okay. Yep, we've got a curriculum. We've got some stuff to do, right? But if the kid is like, you know what, I kind of want to play this other thing, the teacher says, okay, let's go do that, right? And maybe we take a side trip into learning how to play the national anthem or learning how to play the, I don't know, some Taylor Swift song, like whatever, doesn't matter, right? So we don't force it. We keep it playful and child-led. We don't worry too much about systematic instruction. Suzuki instruction does have sort of a systematic thing, but the pace, you can do it at whatever pace you want, right? And so some kids go really fast through Suzuki. Other kids, they go slow. Some of it's also about the kind of teacher that you have, right? So do you have a teacher who is super supportive and everything that the kid does is like, great, now let's try it this way. Great, now let's try it that way, right? We had a Suzuki teacher when my kids were little who had all sorts of little gimmicks. And at the time, they irritated me to no end. Okay, she was constantly giving my kids jelly beans and little stickers and I was like, what are you doing? You'd heard about intrinsic motivation, right? But the fact is that especially when you're talking about a little kid in a violin, there is nothing inherently fun about putting your hand in that position, right? Like expecting intrinsic motivation there is just not going to happen. But you really do need to develop those muscles, right? And doing it 10 times is probably worth a jelly bean for a 7-year-old, right? Bribes, this is a little bit of a side trip, but I think it's an important side trip. Like bribes have a place, okay? When there's never going to be intrinsic motivation. But the kid needs to do it because you, the adult, know that if we do this repetition, it's going to matter. You bribe it, okay? The bribe is small, but it's instant. It's not the star chart that goes to Friday, okay? Because that doesn't have the same impact on the dopamine system. We actually want the dopamine rush. We want it for 2 reasons. One, we want the brain to notice the dopamine rush because it's actually going to say, ooh, that must have been important. I'm going to remember that a little better. It actually helps store memory better. And 2, it makes the kid want to do it again the next time. Okay, so despite the fact that I didn't like the jelly beans actually were doing a really good job. But that's an example of how do we kind of get kids to do something without necessarily forcing it or pushing it and keeping it child-led, but building those sort of core little skills that are going to be essential while we're in phase 1. Okay? In phase 2, this is now when the kid says, you know what? I really, really want, I want to be first chair, right? I want to go join Bellevue Youth Symphony, Seattle Youth Symphony, right? I want to do this. Maybe I want to be a musician when I grow up. Not every kid is ever going to get to stage 2 in any category. And typically a kid will only get to stage 2 in 1 category, maybe 2. Okay? So, and this is about this is a model about who becomes really, really excellent in a field. What are the stages of talent development in that for those kind of people, okay? So the kid says, I really, really, really want to do it, and now they have the motivation to practice. You are not standing over them to practice. They want to do it on their own because they made the commitment. You can't force it. It's not your decision. It's their decision. And for many kids, they're never going to make that decision. That's okay. Because most of our kids are going to be typical adults. They're not going to cure cancer. It's okay. It's okay. But don't make them feel like they have to. Right? Not you're so smart you're going to do something amazing someday. That's way too much pressure on our little people. Because actually the data says it's not likely to happen. It might happen, but it's not likely. Okay? And so that kid who says, I'm going to practice every day. I'm really going to do this. I want to be first chair, right? And maybe they get into the highest level of one of the local symphonies, right? One of the youth symphonies. They're really quite excellent around here. And at that point, we probably need to get that kid a mentor, right? They need an expert violinist who's really going to help them take it to the next level. Does that help? It's not what you wanted to hear, but it helps. Yeah. Yeah. This would be sort of a mentor that is really a true deep expert in their field. Yeah. But remember, this is not every kid is going through these stages. Most kids arguably are not. Okay, last call for questions. I think they're going to throw us out here pretty soon.
Kids who struggle with executive function and not in-depth tasks, and parents who also struggle with those, do you have any resources or is that where it's individual consulting type area?
You're certainly. I have business cards around here somewhere. I think they're on the table over there. Yes, and also specifically for that stuff, there are executive function coaches that can help you really think that through. Okay, typically what they're doing is they're helping you come up with systems. Oh, what you need is a chart here that's got these things on it. Oh, have you thought about putting a basket right next to your door? Have you thought about they'll sort of quiz you what are the problems that you're having, right? And help you problem solve to come up with solutions for those things. But at the end of the day, you're probably still going to need reminders on your watch and your phone and timers and buzzers to remind you to do the plan that you came up with. Because that's the other half of the problem, right? Yeah. On actually using the checklist. Got it. Yeah. Yeah. It works for kids, but it works for adults also. technology tools that with reminders actually works really good for kids to get reminders out of the parent's voice. Because you don't want it to become a relationship issue, right? That you're constantly like nagging on something. But they really do need the reminder, right? Use technology for that. Yeah.
I have a trainer who's doing all kind of crazy ideas, very creative, but the current ability that he can do is limited with age and ADHD and all kinds of stuff. So there's a huge gap to reach the dream that you have, which is wonderful. But you get frustrated because, the gap seems too big, and, we try to support it, but, things will come with the time and things like that. How do you support the kids have that big gap and still encouraging, but also reality check in a way?
Try not to reality check too much. Try to support more the dream. Great, let's go to the museum. Let's go see people who have done stuff similar to this. Let's go find some videos. Let's find some YouTube stuff. Let's find some books. Let's learn about inventors who did something similar. Your goal in stage 1 is to light the fire. Light the fire. Don't douse the fire, light the fire. Yeah.
Do you recommend negative reinforcement also when they want to encourage them to do something?
There's very little data that suggests that negative reinforcement works. Yeah. Almost always positive reinforcement is what you're going for. Maybe. I mean, that is a bribe. Use it appropriately. Use it appropriately. For some things, that's the appropriate thing to do. Read this book and then play video games? Not appropriate. Right? So be thoughtful. All right, you guys, I'm happy to hang around and chit chat, or my guess is we're losing the room here soon. But thank you very much for coming. Thank you for being attentive, for asking all your great questions.